The Super Mario Brothers movie came out earlier this month, and of course, being a certified nerd or a dork or whatever people call me, I watched it, and I watched it with a bunch of my friends. And of course, when you see Mario in a movie, we know that that's going to be the most iconic piece of media of the generation. I mean, it was last time, of course, too. But I couldn't shake this feeling of this recurring trend of video game movies coming out the same way the comic book movies came out at one point. And it's interesting because the transition from video game to movie seems so much more drastic than comic book to movie. So if all those clickbait news headlines are real and video games are the next comic books for movies, which is a sentence that doesn't quite make sense, then I think it's important that we first analyze how video games are functioning in a movie, because in a game the player has agency and control, so the narrative has to fit player action, but in the movie the person, we're passive viewers. So there's naturally this pretty big divide that we can't convey narrative in the same way. We can't even tell narrative remotely in the same way. Fundamentally, there has to be a drastic shift for a video game to function as a movie, and it's interesting to see how they handle gamified elements. And so, to analyze this, I think I have to watch every video game movie. That's what I tried to do. I didn't watch them all, but I watched some of them, and I'm gonna go over those now. The first movie I decided to watch while on a plane to the Game Developers Conference when I noticed this magical movie, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. They didn't have the first one, so we went with the second one. And the second one is very interesting because they find ways to integrate references from the games, but fundamentally the narrative itself is so distant and foreign from the games, and that was the big thing with the first one. And the second one sort of doubled down more on the game elements, but fundamentally there is a pretty substantial shift to the point where this isn't really taking place in the Sonic world anymore. This is taking place in the real world that has Sonic elements infused with it. And surprisingly, it kind of works. In retrospect, I think that the second, while the plot makes more sense, might not be as interesting as the first, which is the opposite of what I thought initially. But that was one interesting thing that I noticed. I think I preferred the second one to the first one, but of course this only meant I had to watch the first one as well, which I did. And the first one, I genuinely think is the better movie, which I didn't think when I saw them both on the same night when, Sonic 2 released. It was interesting because it created this fun dynamic. There was a lot more conversation. It was a much more like conversational and fun movie in that sense. It was much more character oriented rather than plots oriented, and I think that served it pretty well, especially because the plot didn't make sense. And that was like the biggest problem with the movie, is that Sonic has to do this thing about finding this thing in this big city, and he has to do so by slowly riding in a car with a cop. It's weird, but surprisingly, it's a pretty fun movie. There's a lot of really charming dialogue. The dynamic between Sonic and whatever James Marsden's character is actually pretty solid. I thought it was a fun movie. Yeah, it was a good movie. It just didn't really embrace much from the game aside from the characters and general props from the game, but fundamentally, the narrative was very different than what we would see in a Sonic game, but it best served the movie medium. Yeah. Okay, so we got Sonic out of the way, but then it's time, I think, to focus on a next significant gaming mascot that has a video game movie. Lara Croft. The Tomb Raider movies. What bizarre pieces of media. It was so weird. And I think that more so than the Sonic movies. The Lara Croft Tomb Raider movies with Angelina Jolie, they really embrace more of the game. It does, for better or for worse, feel like a plot that you would see in a Tomb Raider game. And when I say for better or for worse, I do mean for worse, because there isn't enough adaptation to make it an enticing movie as opposed to a game. Specifically, there's an action set piece at the end with some revolving globe things, and it's not an uninteresting set piece for a game, but for a movie it was remarkably anticlimactic and uncinematic, and it made me wonder if some of the people who had developed puzzles for the games also developed set pieces for the movie, because it really did feel like it would be quite interesting in a game, but it just didn't work in the movie. So it ties into this general rule that video game movies need to subvert their core stories in order to actually function within the movie medium of storytelling. And surprisingly enough, Lara Croft Tomb Raider 2 actually did a better job, I think. It embraced its own silliness, I think, in a way that the first movie didn't. The first movie played itself a bit more straight, and the second one was willing to let go and just accept some of the absurdity of Tomb Raider, which didn't make it a great movie, but I think it made it much more like cinematic and interesting. Like, Lara Croft punches a shark, and that might not be a great gameplay mechanic, and it might not make sense. It might not make for great storytelling, but it's funny. So there's sort of that divide, and they embrace some of those more silly things that I think made for visually a more interesting movie. Not a good movie, but I think a more effective Tomb Raider movie than the first one, which sort of goes against what reviews have said, but I'll stand by that, yeah. So with the Tomb Raider movies out of the way, I decided to watch Mortal Kombat, the most recent Mortal Kombat movie. And, you know, I gotta be honest, I was watching this and I was really surprised in the first half by how into it I was. I've never played a Mortal Kombat game, right? But when I was watching the movie, there was actually some pretty engaging character dynamics, and it made the first half a bit interesting. Although the action sequences were pretty dull, I think that the characters were able to make up for that, to the point when, yeah, the action sequences weren't as interesting, but the character dynamics were enough to keep me hooked. And then the second half, they sort of toned down those elements to try to build up the climax. But as a result, we focused on what was to that point the worst element of the movie, which is the action. And when the worst part of your Mortal Kombat movie is the action, something went wrong. And I just wish that some of the action sequences were tighter and more interesting, or that the second half in general was better written. Because the first half was, pretty engaging. Not spectacular, but, I was interested, and I wasn't even a fan of the games. And so, yeah, I just wish they could have carried a bit more of those qualities into the second half of the movie, because you could be telling a very different story about the Mortal Kombat movie that I'm sure very few people actually remember at this point. When I started planning out this video, there was a series of movies I absolutely wanted to see because they were important, they were fun. I didn't get to all of them, but one of the ones I was very adamant about seeing was the Animal Crossing movie. I had wanted to see it for a while, and it was a bit tricky to find, but I found it, and it did seem really cute. Like, you could see the Studio Ghibli effect in a way, and it seems like something that would fit Animal Crossing quite well, having this sort of slice of life quality where it's really just focused on how characters engage with each other in this place. And what I wanted from an Animal Crossing movie was to feel cozy and comfortable. And I absolutely felt that way for the majority of the movie. It was really relaxing and soothing. You could just sort of let yourself soak in and just embrace it a bit. And it was also very pretty. A lot of the art was really nice, and there were a couple of shots where they did this like parallax thing, really struck out as quite pleasing and visually interesting. The problem with this movie is I don't like the main character, which sort of sounds like a pretty glaring problem, but I don't think it necessarily was. I just think that the main character was the least interesting one, and I wish that something had been able to be changed so that that character could be more engaging, because then I could care more about their individual relationships. I mean, really, the relationships that they formed, what I cared about was the other characters, the characters from the Animal Crossing games. And I think that a lot of those characters were really well realized and charming. And even though I hadn't played an Animal Crossing game, I could really get an essence and feel for the characters. And I love the movie went through various seasons. There was a lot of visual change and growth that I think also played into the slice of life nature of it, that there wasn't really an overarching plot. It was just characters living in this space together, which those are often my favorite types of narratives. So I just wish that the main character had been more interesting. And at the same time, when it did get into some sort of plot element, which sometimes even a slice of life movie has to do, right? Because it has to have something that the characters overcome, some challenge that is able to climax and conclude the movie. Otherwise, it just ends and you don't feel like you got any payoff or reward. And they do it with this UFO that was a little bit confusing, but also I was totally okay with it at the same time. It was just the level of like silliness. It's just like, okay, this is a little weird, but I can play into it. And maybe it could have been handled better, and I'm sure that for many people who watch the movie, that will be the most off-putting part. It was a little weird, but it was easy enough to buy into, and I don't necessarily think it was like a bad thing from the movie. It just could have done it better. I don't think it did it bad, though. It was generally a pretty interesting movie, and it's something I hope that Nintendo is willing to do in the future, is create movies that have a bit of a slower pace and let people soak in more, just appreciate their worlds. Like, Nintendo worlds mean so much to so many people that we just want to have the time to really soak it in and enjoy being there. That's what the movie can do, is gorgeously realize these worlds in this level of detail that we don't necessarily see in games, where we can just soak it in and be there and let the orchestra overtake and just let the music sway you into that scene and that feel. And I think that if Nintendo can realize that in their movies, you know, there's a lot of good things coming. Which ties into the Mario movie, which I did see on opening weekend with another group of my friends, the same group that I went to see the Sonic 2 movie with. And I like the Mario movie. I do. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think that it's really pretty, and there's a lot of fun character moments, a lot of really cool visual stuff. Visually, it's a very interesting movie. My biggest complaint is what I just mentioned with Animal Crossing, that it felt so rushed to the next scene that you didn't have time to really just appreciate where you were. Especially because there's a few moments where the orchestra really swells with these beautiful renditions of classic Mario songs. They sort of pan out the camera and you just see the characters in these pretty, gorgeous Mario worlds with this music, and you're just like, yes, this moment, I'm feeling it. This is like the moment that makes it special. And then I was so disappointed, because every single time it brought me to that moment where I felt like I just want to sit here for a few moments, take it in, and just enjoy it, it cut away. And often it cut away with a joke. And it felt so unrewarding when that moment that was almost just beautiful was cut by something that wasn't really funny and just changed the pace, almost making fun of the fact that they were taking in this a bit of a more emotional moment. It's a movie that's so afraid of slowing down, and I think it's detrimented for that. There's a lot of things in the movie I like the visuals and the characters, and it's a really fun plot. You know, it gets you into the silly stuff, and it gets you into the fun Mario stuff, a bunch of the goofy jokes, and there are a couple of jokes that really land as well. There's a lot of elements that are working for this movie, and I know a lot of my friends loved it, and I think it was just held back in its pacing. And if it had slowed down a bit, it could have been something very different. But ultimately, it was a good experience, and I'm really hopeful for the future of movies made by Nintendo, and I hope that they can get better at it, right? This was sort of their first real go of making video game movies in a while, and they did a pretty good job, and I'm excited to see them push into those effective qualities more, and I think they can, because a lot of these issues that I think I was having with the movie, a lot of people have also been having, and I'm excited that the movie has been doing well, that Nintendo has the time to make more, and I hope that when they make more, they're able to, you know, edit and evolve, and I think they will. Everyone does. And that was all the video game movies I saw, but it wasn't all of the ones that I wanted to see, so when I came back from the Mario movie, I knew it was time to continue watching all the rest of them, a lot of the big important ones that I had missed, and, well, I gotta be honest, things got really hectic for me really quickly while I was doing this video. So outside of this whole YouTube role, I'm actually directing a play right now, and I'm also doing this whole being an 18 credit hour student thing, and the both of those together have become a bit overwhelming, especially when I'm trying to continue making videos for YouTube at the same time. But this last week or so, as we build up to the show premiering, has really led to me losing sleep sometimes. And it's making me feel unmotivated to continue watching video game movies for this video. So yeah, that's kind of like the last thing I want to be doing right now. My brain is too busy thinking about other things to really be thinking about video game movies to watch and when to watch them. So I'm not going to. This is it. We're done. We watched a good few, and yeah, that's it for this video. We're done. Sometimes it's weird to say something like that because we live in a culture that's so vehement that you can't give up and you have to follow through and finish everything. But I think that we say something like that because it sounds correct, but when we say that, we're not really considering the needs of the individual. Like, it's okay to not finish something. It's okay to stop and settle sometimes if that's what you need to do. We don't always finish things, and sometimes it's okay to take a step back and say, okay, this is okay for now. I don't need to do this right now. So when you feel that moment, sometimes it's just not worth pushing yourself over what you can handle to try to finish something. So this is not me giving up on this video. This is me recognizing a need for me to spend more time taking care of myself. And that's what I'm gonna do. We have to make the decisions that are best for us in that specific moment. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'd love to, at some point, revisit this whole video idea and maybe finish watching some of the ones that I didn't get to finish. But
for now, I'm okay with what I've done, and I'm okay taking a step back for now and letting everything else that's going on have some time to breathe, give myself time to breathe, and then come back when it feels right to do that. So, yeah.